On the afternoon of the festival, when lanterns were still strung between fish-melling stalls and paper pinwheels still spun lazily above buckets of squid, the first unmistakable hiss of rain pushed across the harbor like an enormous sigh. No one in Greyhaven was surprised. Rain had always been the town's second pulse, but this particular shower arrived with a quality of listening, as if the clouds themselves were leaning down to eavesdrop. Fishermen's wives paused in the act of gutting mackerel, and children, who moments before had been arguing over candied eel, raised their heads with identical frowns. I felt it too. The air seemed packed with unspoken words, ticklish on the inner ear. The gulls, usually shrieking for discarded entrails, cut a sharp circle and fled inland, into the fog-cloaked pines. Somewhere below the wetted ropes and creaking hulls, I almost thought I heard voices, thin, insistent, and drifting through the rattle of rain against the planked pier. They were not the normal, comforting voices of the town, not the gruff barters or the gossip about whether the lighthouse would finally be repaired this season. They were farther away, echoey, blurred, the way song sounds when you plunge your head beneath bathwater. "Hold tight," someone seemed to call, or perhaps, "Cold night." A woman's voice trembled in the overlaps. "Tell them! Tell them!" But her plea was erased each time a gust knifed through the rigging. Consonants dissolved, only vowels remained, a vast wavering moan stitched through the downpour. By the time the first proper sheets of rain slapped the cobbles, everyone in the market had fallen silent, chins tilted as if waiting for an announcement. Umbrellas cracked open like small black parachutes, and the crowd huddled under their makeshift canopies. That was when the second impossibility began. Where the cloth should have beaded rainwater in clear, odorless droplets, it instead collected a shimmering film of pale blue. Aunt Morel, who owned the stall beside mine, was the first to notice. She lifted her parasol, a floral thing inherited from her mother, stared at the pooling liquid in its hollow, and whispered, "Salt." She dipped a fingertip, tasted it, and shuddered. Around us, other people were performing the same grim experiment, some pricking their tongues, others just sniffing with a face half-pinched between confusion and dread. Salt water, from clouds that had been born far inland. Within minutes, the fabric hollows turned into shallow basins, each holding a trembling mirror of seawater, and inside those mirrors impossible reflections emerged. They were not the faces of the umbrella holders, but strangers, water-blurred, gray-lipped, hair floating in drifts as though under water. A gaunt man, with a nose broken leftward and barnacle marks on his cheeks. A girl no older than 12 whose braids waved weightlessly around her ears. An old sailor, eyes open, white mustache wafting like seaweed. Whenever fresh drops fell, concentric ripples distorted the portraits, and each distortion made the drowned mouths move. No sound issued from the umbrellas themselves, yet the voices braided through the storm grew louder, syllables clicking like loose teeth against the wharf. I should tell you that Greyhaven has always lived beneath the rumor of hauntings. Our tides claim lives every year, drunk deckhands toppling from gangplanks, trawlers sucked under by rogue swells, lovelorn fools letting heavy coats serve as anchors. We honor them each equinox by chalking their names on the seawall before the paint crews come. Some chalk marks are decades old. Rain cannot quite erase them. Yet never before had the lost insisted on speaking back with such collective urgency. My mother was among them. She vanished with the Dawn Star 3 winters prior, when a stalled engine left their trawler drifting into a gale. I had been 17, too young to sign on to the rescue ships, but old enough to inherit her debts. Ever since, I'd worked the stall she had leased, selling spools of colored line, spare hooks, waxed canvas patches, while half believing she might return someday, shoulders sunburned, laughing at her unbelievable luck. Now, as the storm thickened, I wondered if one of the blurred faces in the umbrellas might be hers. "Kaz," Aunt Marie called across the narrow aisle, jerking her chin toward my closed parasol leaning against a crate. "Open it. Best do it quickly before—" She didn't finish, because everyone knew the unspoken half. Before the voices turned angry. I hesitated. Superstition ran deep here, and the November air felt sharpened by more than cold. Still, I reached for the parasol, flicked the catch, and raised it above my shoulder. The inside of my umbrella bloomed with seawater immediately, as though I'd scooped a ladle from the harbor. The liquid smelled of rusted chains and crushed brine shrimp. It settled, glassy, and revealed a single face. A woman, early 40s, hair cut short for convenience, freckles stitching the bridge of her nose. She looked asleep at first, lids lowered. Then her eyes opened, milky but aware, and her lips trembled. The raindrops stippled her forehead like beads of sweat. My breath abandoned me. It was my mother. Raindrops pocked the surface, smearing her features again and again. Yet each new accumulation cleared and she reformed, staring upward through a film no thicker than a fingernail. The strange acoustics of the storm tunneled her voice directly to my eardrums. "South Ridge," she murmured. "Lantern," and then, louder, as if desperate, "I understand." Low tide. I nearly dropped the umbrella. Aunt Morel lunged, steadied the shaft. Her own parasol floated 5 distinct faces. Some she recognized. Her husband's brother, lost 20 years ago. The town librarian who'd gone fishing on his day off and never came back. She was shaking visibly, but retained the sailor's habit of controlled breath. "They're given directions," she said, hoarse. "We need to listen." Others had discovered the same. Around the market, umbrellas tilted, swiveled like black satellites seeking more bandwidth. People knelt, tears mixing with rain, listening to instructions or apologies or warnings no one on land had ever expected to receive. Someone tried closing their umbrella in panic. The water splashed onto the cobbles and promptly seeped into the cracks, where for a moment drowned eyes peered from between stones before fading. Silence dropped around that umbrella's owner, and no matter how he opened it again, the cloth remained dry. Ordinary, bereft of faces. A collective gasp traveled the ring of crowd. A single lost chance. We understood then there would only be one opportunity to heed whatever the rainstorm sought to deliver. So we gathered under awnings and between leaning boats to confer, comparing snippets. The instructions differed in phrasing, yet a theme emerged. South Ridge, Lantern Cliff, low tide, tonight. A dozen conflicting rumors knifed through the group talk of hidden caves, of treasure, of hellmouths that could be sealed only by living witnesses. Old Priya Connell swore her drowned fiancé demanded we bring the names, whatever that meant. Another woman said her sister's face kept repeating, "Open the door, open the door," without specification. Skeptics, ironically the most terrified, insisted we ignore the spectral summons and stay indoors until the storm passed. But they held their umbrellas like shields, unwilling to cast away the proof. I returned to my stall, closed the shutters, and hid my merchandise out of the rain's reach. If the umbrellas emptied when the cloth dried, I didn't want to lose my mother's presence prematurely. I carried the half-sill basin of my parasol like a relic through the slanted streets toward home. The faces persisted. Even simple veering caused the waterline to slosh, distorting her shape into a cubist nightmare before it settled again. Each time, fresh anguish filled those clouded eyes, as though she feared the motion would spill her into nothingness. "Low tide," she repeated whenever the distortion cleared, urgent, insistent, until the words lost sense and became raw phonemes. At home, my brother Jonas waited, ankles still healing from a rope burn he'd earned in the trawling nets. He sat beside the hearth reading last season's tide charts. One look at my umbrella and his skepticism shattered. Tears marched down his cheeks, leaving clean tracks in the soot smearing his skin. What Mother told him differed only slightly. Something about follow the red gate. We put the two clues together, dredged up half-remembered geography of Lantern Cliff, and concluded she meant the rusted maintenance door at the base of the lighthouse, a door painted crimson decades ago, but now nearly consumed by flakes of oxidation. Night bled across the horizon in bruised purples, and the rain did not let up. Lightning crackled but never struck. Thunder rumbled yet seemed muffled, as if it too came from underwater. The voices remained, woven into every gust, harmonizing like choirs from distant cathedrals. By 7, a procession of umbrella bearers streamed along the southward coastal path, black domes bobbing in the gloom. Oil lamps dangled from wrists or belts, their flames sputtering yet undying inside thick glass. I recognized many faces. Doc Halverson with his limp, the 3 Alvarez sisters whispering prayers in alternation, and Councilman Stern, who had run on a platform of stricter harbor laws, yet now clutched his umbrella like a lifeline. No one spoke above a murmur for fear the rain voices might grow confused. Between cliffs the wind funneled into a grieving whistle. Lantern Cliff loomed ahead. Its lighthouse dark, funding for repairs, had failed again this quarter. Below the bulk of granite a narrow shingle of beach glistened. The tide was indeed descending, revealing flats of seaweed and puddled rock that would be submerged again by dawn. All at once, my mother's face turned serene, the fearful urgency replaced by expectation. I felt her say, without words, "You are here." The red gate, if it still deserved that color, showed as a warped rectangle at the cliff base, half buried in barnacles. When the crowd made way for Jonas and me, I understood they were yielding leadership because our instructions had been the surest. Together we approached, seawater flopping softly in our umbrellas like hearts made visible. At arm's length, the drowned reflections quivered, regarding the corroded door with recognition. "Now what?" Jonas whispered. Somewhere behind us a child asked her father the same question. "Open it," I said, though fear perched on each vertebra. My free hand grasped the rusted handle. It stuck, screeched, then surrendered with a brittle snap. One hinge gave way and the whole sheet of metal sagged inward. A smell exhaled, one I dreaded yet expected. Old tide pools, algae rot, but also something clean, like the crispness after lightning. Above its mouth an inscription, formerly hidden by the closure, appeared carved into the stone lintel. "Give back what the sea took." Inside was neither storeroom nor staircase, but a tunnel sloping downward, carved roughly, slick with salts. No lamp had hung there for decades, yet the walls glimmered with faint blue luminescence, as if impregnated with plankton. The air hummed at the same frequency as the rain voices. A resonance that vibrated in my molars. Everyone hesitated, including me. Mother's face, my guide, tilted, and droplets painted her forehead. Through lips that now moved with distinct articulation, she formed words I read more than heard. "Bring us home." And then, "Pour." She looked upward, meaning the water that held her. At once comprehension snapped into place. The umbrellas were vessels, but only vessels. We had to empty them here, at the door between elements. I positioned my umbrella over the threshold. Jonas did the same. One by one the crowd advanced, their faces floating like lanterns lit from within. We counted perhaps 50 separated souls. The living formed 2 lines, reverent as mourners, and tilted their canopies until seawater slid into the tunnel. It rushed in thin rivers, carried by gravity deeper into darkness. As each bowl emptied, the faces dissolved into swirls, eyes last to disband, mouths stretching in silent farewells or promises. When my mother's features unraveled, I expected grief to fill me like cement, yet an inexplicable reassurance took root instead. Her acceptance rippled through me. She was going where she needed. When the last drop fell, the hum of the tunnel crescendoed. A roll of thunder answered, though the sky produced no lightning. Somewhere in the cliff's marrow, stone grated against stone. A wind, born from inside the earth, blew outward, dry, scented with something floral, perhaps the phantom of distant meadows. It whisked past my cheeks, lifting my hair, and scattered across the beach. The market lanterns flickered miles behind us, though no gust should have reached that far. Then, silence, not merely an absence of noise, but the heavy hush that follows an orchestra's final chord, the ear straining for any echo and finding none. We waited. The rain continued, yet ordinary again, fresh, unsalted. Umbrellas no longer filled. The tidal flats shimmered but held only the mirrored bleakness of the night sky. A few people lowered their umbrellas and turned them inside out for inspection, finding nothing more mystical than damp fabric. Priestess Lewin, who'd accompanied out of academic curiosity, whispered a benediction, whose words I didn't catch. Others simply hugged, relief, sorrow, confusion tangled together. I stepped inside the tunnel, heedless of cautions, my lamp held high. It extended perhaps 20 feet before widening into a small cavern where seawater pooled ankle-deep. In the center, resting atop a natural pillar of stone, lay objects, not bones or bodies, but belongings. A necklace I recognized as Mother's, carved from abalone shell. A captain's cap embroidered with the Dawn Star's insignia. The librarian's waterproof satchel, dozens more tokens, each intact. As I reached forward, expecting my hand to pass through an illusion, the shell necklace clinked against my knuckles. It was real. The drowned, in surrendering themselves, had returned what the living could still use. I gathered the necklace, sobbing quietly. Others came and found their own relics, some items none of us could identify. We agreed to safeguard them until owners emerged or histories were discovered. We left the cavern in stages, careful not to jostle the water, whose surface now lay still, creating a mirror that reflected only rock and lamplight. A different inscription, previously submerged, circled the base of the pillar. The sea remembers, but does not keep. Low tide neared its nadir and began to reverse. We sealed the red gate as best we could, wedging the broken hinge back into place. When the tide climbed, it would cover the door once more. Maybe it would stay closed for another generation. Maybe not. But Greyhaven, whose people rarely owned more than the clothes they wore and the resilience in their chests, had seen a threshold no map recorded, and returned alive. Back in town, the storm thinned to drizzle. Street lamps regained confidence. I reopened my umbrella out of habit. It remained politely empty, water slipping straight off. The hush of the aftermath carried a new note, the absence of moaning voices, replaced by faint gull cries returning from the forest refuge. Jonas walked beside me, cradling the captain's cap like a bird's egg. Neither of us spoke until we reached home. "Do you think?" he said finally. "They're gone for good." "I think," I answered after a long moment. "They're home, whatever that means for them." I touched Mother's necklace, still damp. "And we're here. That'll have to be enough." He nodded. The hearth's embers glowed, ready to be coaxed into flame. Outside, gutters burbled with plain, sweet rainwater rushing toward the sea. We lit a lamp and set the relics on the table to dry. The silence inside the house felt expansive, vulnerable, and essential, like the pause between waves. We let it fill us, unafraid, as the storm lifted its final veil and slipped silently back over the horizon.